Okay, hi everybody. Welcome and thank you so much for coming to listen to Kelsie Olds, the occupational therapist, who is speaking with us tonight on interoception, which I had never even heard of until I had a child that was struggling, and so I'm really interested in the depth that we're going to get to see this evening. And I follow Kelsie on Facebook. If you are a Facebook user, she is the occupational therapist. And I have learned so much that I was really excited to invite her to do this for us at Neurodiversity Ireland. So thank you all for being here. This is Kelsie Olds, the occupational therapist, and I'll let you take over, Kelsie. You're on mute, hun.
Sorry about that.
I think I muted you when I muted all the people.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
sorry.
I was
That
getting
was
ready
probably
to
my fault.
launch right into it. I did want to say that if you have questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the chat so that you don't forget, so that we can just read them at the end. And I will come back to look at the chat, or she will help me look at the chat at the end so that we can go through those questions, because I have a chunk of time set aside for Q&A. So I'm just going to dive right into talking about feeling all the feelings, about regulation, which is, I'll define here in a second, and about interoception, which is like your sense of what's going on inside your body. In a lot of parenting spaces that I see on the internet, I hear the word regulate used as if it is a fancy way to say calm down. Dysregulation is sometimes used as a synonym for grumpiness or sadness, and when in fact it's much more complex than either of those things. When I'm trying my best to use a non-jargony sounding term, the one that I typically find myself reaching for to substitute for dysregulated is the phrase out of whack. Of course, that's not perfect, but it's the closest that I can get in kind of slang terms. Another way of saying it could be that there is an energy mismatch between the person and the activity or the environment, or that the person and the activity or the environment are out of sync. So then it's important to realize that regulated doesn't mean happy either. Someone can be regulated and contented, or they could be regulated and calm, regulated and serious. They could be regulated and even sad or angry if the situation is actually calling for either of those things and the person is still in control of themselves. I actually have the opportunity to give you a relatively personal example, which is that about a week ago, I got some very upsetting personal news. And in the day that I got it, I was completely thrown out of whack, out of sync, out of mismatch with my activity and my environment that I needed to do, which was to be able to keep continuing working at work. And in fact, I was struggling to hold it together. I was stepping out of rooms so that I could like take a moment to like grieve, or to try to take care of myself. But in the meantime, I was struggling to eat. I didn't eat lunch that day. I struggled to eat dinner when I got home. I was so upset and so out of whack, out of sync, that I couldn't cope with those feelings and also still be present at work in the way that I needed to be for the kids that I needed to be there. 1 week later, I'm still feeling upset about what happened, but I'm no longer dysregulated. I am regulated in this moment. I'm presenting this to you. I'm not in distress, but I'm regulated and sad, or regulated and upset. Those things are not opposites. Dysregulation could be affected by emotions like grumpiness or sadness, and it can be exacerbated by physical causes like hunger or discomfort. When someone is dysregulated, it means that their nervous system is not able to react appropriately to the situation that they're in. From a technical standpoint, dysregulated could mean too high of a reaction, and it could also mean too low of a reaction. But the vast majority of the time when lay people use it, they are referring to too high of a reaction. So that's generally also what I'm referring to throughout this presentation. I'll try to clarify if I'm talking about too low of a reaction instead, but otherwise you can assume that I mean reacting too high. Things are setting you off that wouldn't set you off otherwise. Your emotions are on a hair trigger. Regulated means that your energy levels match the task. Dysregulated means that your energy levels do not match the task. I've got this wonderful cartoon drawn by Neurowild, who makes amazing art that explains neurodiversity related concepts. A child laughing hysterically and kicking and squealing and play fighting is not regulated to go to sleep. A child laughing hysterically and running enthusiastically through an open field outside is perfectly regulated to play outside in a big open field. So sometimes helping a child or yourself regulate means putting the person into an environment where their level of energy matches the environment. Sometimes helping a child or a person regulate means helping their body get its need met so that the energy can match the task that's up next. Sometimes regulation just takes time, and there's no way to pass through that storm like a fast forward button. It's important to know that a dysregulated brain has lost access to higher brain functions like logic, paying attention, self-control, maybe even use of language. When someone is dysregulated, their logic brain is not functioning in that moment. That means that trying to reason or lecture or punish them out of it is not going to help. Their brain is not reacting out of logic. The fastest way for someone who is dysregulated to become regulated is called co-regulation. Co-regulation with the prefix co, like means with someone else, like cooperate. You're operating with someone else, or coworker, you're working with someone else. Humans are inherently social creatures. We are so social that being around someone who is regulated in their body, plus enough time, is really all that it takes to get regulated in our own body. Our body will unconsciously match their breathing, their heart rate. Our brain realizes that it's not in danger, it's not under threat, and stops putting out panic hormones that make us want to fight or run away. Have you ever been very upset and then had a person that you love just hold space for you until your body has had time to calm? Maybe they physically hugged or held you. Maybe they just sat beside you. Maybe they held your hand. Maybe you cried. Maybe you raged. Maybe you just sat there in shock. But with time, the emotion, the intensity passed, and you were able to think logically again. Maybe you were able to do something to address the situation. Maybe it wasn't a situation that could be fixed. But after a time period, your body was able to choose to go get some food or get a drink of water because you had to keep existing. Kids are not the only ones who co-regulate, although they often need it as their primary coping strategy, where for adults, it's just one of many. This starts out at birth. A child is born and placed with loving and responsive caregivers. When a baby becomes dysregulated, they cry. They react with every fiber of their being to a state of something being wrong because they don't know how to tone down their reactions at all yet, or how to measure a situation and determine what kind of reaction it needs. They pretty much only know how to scream with every bit of air in their lungs when something goes wrong or when anything feels wrong in their body at all. Then a caregiver who can better assess the situation than the baby can takes care of the need that was causing them to cry. The caregiver's calm presence also co-regulates with the baby's nervous system. Their brain learns for the first or second or third time that it is possible to move from a dysregulated state to a regulated state. Before that process happens, how could they know? It is all inward. It's not like they could watch it happen. They must co-regulate with somebody in order to learn that it's even possible for those feelings to pass and for the storm to calm. If they don't have anyone with them to co-regulate with them, the feelings still eventually pass, the storm still eventually calms, but rather than learning that they were safe with another person, they begin learning that they are all alone in those feelings, and maybe even eventually that suppressing those feelings is important in order to earn the right to not be alone. That can be very damaging when that happens. That damages baby's attachment and the type of attachment style that they form with their caregiver. So I drew this picture. This is not like a scientific graph or anything like that. I drew it, but the state of being regulated doesn't look like remaining calm and steady 100% of the time and never going out of it. It looks like being able to move through the lows and highs and come back to a state of baseline. That's regulation in the as a concept of like regulation, looking at whether somebody's skill of regulation across their lifespan, they might be in a state of being dysregulated when they're at one of the lows, but that doesn't mean, or when they're at one of the highs, but that doesn't mean that they are perpetually in a state of living in dysregulation. So anything that we do at all in life, walking, talking, riding a bike, memorizing a telephone number, responding to our children, anything we ever do is by neurons in your brain firing. Imagine that each neuron has to travel from one place to another, and then the next neuron, when it goes from one place to another, it hands off the baton to the next neuron, and that goes from that place to the next, and that place to the next, and so on, like a relay race. If you do anything at all in life more than one time, that makes the same set of neurons fire a second time. And then as you do it more and more, that set of neurons firing in that way becomes like a pathway. Like if the neurons have to race in the same way every time, they create a path, like how running in a grassy field will eventually create a path if enough people keep walking in the same place over and over through the same broken or trodden down grass. The more times that the path is worn down, the more well-worn and easily accessible the path becomes. Regulation, or anything that we do as human beings, is the same way. With time and maturity, the regulation pathway becomes easier to access, even without the help of someone to co-regulate. So once you've spent time co-regulating with a person, your nervous system calming down, you realizing that these emotions are survivable, every time you do that, you're helping retrod the pathway over and over and over again until it becomes more and more easily accessible, until it becomes maybe the most easily accessible reaction to a situation is starting down the pathway towards becoming regulated, rather than going down a different pathway like that looks like super dysregulated behaviors, like throwing things or hitting or swearing. This learning process is called self-regulation. Co-regulation taught the brain of the baby that it was possible to do. It was possible to self-regulate. The adult modeled that. And eventually, after wearing it down over time, they learn how to do it themselves. They learn coping strategies. They learn when they need to ask for help. But this is a complex process with many components, and learning this skill may not just be a straight line pathway. I think in my experience that one place where parents or caregivers or adults start to get burned out is the idea that co-regulation means that they, the adult, need to be dragged fully down into the bog of the child's emotions every single time that the child has emotions. And that might be happening quite frequently, depending on the child and their circumstances and their neurology and so on. Some kids just really, really feel things. And it would seem rightly overwhelming to a parent or an adult, especially if they're the only trustworthy adult in that kid's life, which some parents are the only one who that kid can rely on to be a co-regulator with them instead of reacting in a different way. And it can be really overwhelming to that person to imagine that they have to have their day interrupted like 300 times while they just like be sad and devastated with their child over and over about them getting the wrong color bowl or whatever. I think it's really important to completely and totally rewrite that. I think that comes from a place of love and being absolutely well-meaning, the most possible well-meaning. But I don't think it's healthy for either the child or the adult. Being empathetic does not mean getting sucked all the way down into a hole. You can be authentically empathetic and still give your child as much time and space for their emotions as they need, and still yourself stay out of the hole. It takes time and practice, and it's harder to begin implementing when your kid is older and you change things than it is to lay the groundwork from the beginning, but both are possible. I would say that fully half or maybe more of the empathy that I express for my kids, who I'm the mom of, during the day is little more than me being like, oh man, that really sucks, or oh, I'm sorry that happened to you. And I'm saying that with an authentic tone. I have this written down, and if it was written, I don't know if it would translate the same way, but I'm saying that with genuine empathy. And I'm not saying that this is all I offer. Like I just walk up and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you, and then I walk away. or I cut my kids off after that point. I mean that in a lot of cases at this time in our lives, they get what they need from just that much of an interaction. Something doesn't work just right. They want to be seen about it. They want me to acknowledge their struggle, their frustration, their disappointment, and be seen. And I acknowledge it, and I fully see it. I usually name what it is. Oh, I'm so sorry that fell down. That I saw how hard you were working on that. That's really frustrating. Me finishing the interaction there, or me not necessarily jumping to saying anything more than just that until I gauge what they need from me, doesn't mean that that's all it takes and then they've snapped into happiness and now everything is fine and we're all happy again, because regulated doesn't mean happy. They might still be flopping around on the floor for another 15 minutes being like, that's not fair, it fell down, that's not fair, I don't want to do that, I don't want to go to bed. As they're getting older, they know that they have the time that they need to do that. If I need to be moving them somewhere, that I can move them on with kind of confident momentum, like, I know this is really disappointing. Okay, we're going upstairs. I'll go with you. Let's hold hands. They might, as they're getting older, they're starting to have had more and more experiences in their babyhood and in their toddlerhood that they can build on to begin learning the foundation of how to self-regulate. So where my child would have used to just scream immediately when something went wrong, or throw something immediately when something went wrong, he still might have a frustration tolerance that only lasts a few seconds before he gets frustrated. But then he might be able to say, I'm frustrated. And that I can see how that is a step up from just screaming or just throwing something. And then as more time goes by, he goes from one thing goes wrong 1 second later, he's screaming, he's frustrated, to one thing goes wrong 10 seconds later, he's screaming, he's frustrated, or one thing goes wrong 1 minute later, he's screaming, he's frustrated. And it's like he's expanding the self-regulation pathway. Might be able to do it halfway, might be able to get 90% of the way with me co-regulating. And then I walk away and continue doing what I need to do, and they can get the rest of the way there by themselves. Those babies who didn't used to know how to do anything other than scream with their whole being have now had a lot of practice and a lot of examples of what it means to survive through the storm. Self-regulation is not just one thing. It is a big skill made out of a lot of little skills. These little skills might include differentiating between things such as, when is it helpful to distract myself, like not process this emotion, but postpone the processing for later, versus when do I need to stop everything else I'm doing and sit down and set it aside and talk this all out instead? Or who is the right person who I need to unload or vent to? And who should I politely keep things back from? Like, maybe I'm not going to unload all of my struggles on the cashier at the grocery store. And what tools do I have that work for me? What ones don't work for me, even if they seem like they work for somebody else? I worked with somebody recently who had a trauma in their past that meant that drawing attention to their breathing actually made them feel worse. And so everybody's default suggestion is, oh, work on deep breaths. As soon as somebody started saying that to this person, they would get worse, because that brought back to mind a trauma for them. It was a trauma trigger. And so what tools do work for me, what tools do not work for me, and then interpreting interoceptively, what are my internal feelings that I'm feeling, and what do those mean? How do I make sense of those for me? Because they can be very different. And I'm going to come back to that in much more detail later. We learn these skills from going through this process over and over and over, from trial and error, from the modeling of the people around us. But one thing we can only learn by experiencing it over and over is that emotions are survivable. We live through anxiety, sadness, overwhelming excitement, fear, frustration. We live through it and we survive it. We survive all of it. Feelings are wonderful and powerful and huge. The process of learning how to tolerate them while still keeping hold of your logic brain is very challenging. And perhaps unsurprisingly, kids do this a massive amount of the time through play. It's not just through their co-regulating with us that they learn to strengthen this skill. It's also through their repeated play over and over and over. You might have guessed by my name, the occupational therapist, that this was going to come up at some point. Now, here's the thing. with me, with where I've worked, a lot of public schools in the US, I know a lot of public schools in the UK. I know that I have people who are listening to this who are not from those countries, but those are the ones that I have personal experience with. I believe that this is becoming more ubiquitous elsewhere in the world as well, but at least I can speak to in the US and the UK. A lot of schools have begun figuring out how they can outright, overtly teach social emotional skills and things like self-regulation and coping skills to children. They might have the kids come for like coping skills groups, or have a time when they set aside to speak with the whole class about social emotional skills and coping skills. I want to say before I move to the next slide that I am not against that. I think it's great that kids' mental health is being recognized as an important factor in their success at school. I think that's incredibly needed. I think that it's important enough for people to even prioritize over academics, or at least in tandem with academics. I also think that it makes perfect sense that this right now, where we're at in schools, is like a figuring out process, and it wasn't perfect from the get-go, because most things aren't. They take time to figure out. I think that it's crucially important in the wake of COVID, with the amount of trauma that students have experienced and many are ongoingly experiencing, that schools be aware of the power that they have to be able to equip kids with emotional skills like these and figure out how to use that power wisely and helpfully. And I think there are so many therapists and school counselors and other supporting staff out there in the world right now who are trying to do their utmost to do exactly that. There is a problem on a systemic level with that, with this plan. And by systemic, I mean, I would never point to any single counselor and be like, you're the problem here. I would never blame a teacher for doing everything that they can within this system. But the system itself is still set up for failure anyway. And, or if not so quite a drastic a word as for a failure, then at least for a struggle, if nothing else. And the reason for that is that in my experience, many schools and therapists and teachers and even parents and caregivers who are trying to take their lead from schools and educators are trying to get their child to buy into a system of overt artificial self-regulation tools, while also systemically the natural self-regulation skill building activities are almost entirely, if not completely entirely, suppressed. Here's what I mean by that, because that was a lot of jargon. Wrestling, rough and tumble play builds self-regulation. Playing with risky tools and materials builds self-regulation. Playing freely with sensory-rich materials builds self-regulation. Playing socially with others and fighting and arguing and bickering and not getting along and them having more than you and you being mad about it and you having more than them and them being mad about it builds self-regulation. Getting loud and yelling and moving through a range of volumes build self-regulation. Trying to do hard things that you were personally interested in and that you personally sought out because you were interested in them, that you chose and are motivated to do, but you cannot do them yet because you physically can't, build self-regulation. Sensory stims and fidgeting and play and self-soothing techniques are self-regulation tools. Picking things apart is a self-regulation tool. Sucking and chewing on things and mouthing things is a self-regulation tool. Stomping your feet is a self-regulation tool. Yelling is a self-regulation tool. Crying is a self-regulation tool. Picking up heavy things and flipping them over or throwing them is a self-regulation tool. Throwing yourself on the ground and feeling a hard impact is a self-regulation tool. Running around, rolling around, flipping, somersaulting, wiggling, these are self-regulation tools. And almost every single one of those things I named comes naturally to a child or a group of children left to their own devices. And almost every single one of those things I just named are utterly policed to the maximum degree by school and childcare professionals and well-meaning parents and caregivers too. Some of that is necessary. I understand why there can't be a class of 30 kids and they're all freely allowed to just wrestle one another all the time in the middle of class or outright fight without adult support. I understand that. I'm not saying that they should be. That's why I'm calling this a systemic issue. This is an issue in the way that our systems are built. We've built systems that can't support children being children, and then we blame the children for the fact that it's not working. We have tried to replace all of the collective of all of these things with like a counselor will come into your classroom and teach you all how to do deep breaths and maybe a yoga pose, and we wonder why it's not working sufficiently for them. It's like taking a plant and saying, well, we won't let it have any water or sunshine or soil, but we've put it under an artificial bulb and we've given it this scientifically engineered jelly, and we can't tell why it's not working. The ingredients that we're using to replace the natural ones don't do the same thing. I pulled this comic from Calvin and Hobbes, in which I'm going to read it just in case it's small on your screen. Calvin's sitting at his desk in class and looking completely zoned out, very out of whack, very energy mismatch with the environment. And he suddenly screams, "What on earth am I doing in here on this beautiful day? This is the only life I've got." And he flips his desk and he flips his chair and he runs screaming out of the classroom. And then in the last panel, the teacher is carrying him back to his desk and saying, "Next time, try a drink of water and a few deep breaths." This is not quite, this is barely, this is barely an exaggeration from my own work experience. The ingredients that we're using to try to replace the natural ones are not doing the same thing. 20 minutes of recess or 40 minutes of recess with monitors around who need to boss kids about all the things they can play, and strict rules about how the kids can move their bodies, how many people can climb on the monkey bars, and who can go down the slide, and which direction you need to go, and who can talk to who, and who can play with who, and who can go where, and only peers available who are exactly the same age as you, and a highly artificial environment socially. And in terms of materials around, everything is plastic, everything was manufactured for what an adult thought would be fun. And that does not replace 6 to 8 hours of unstructured free play according to one's own brain and own ideas. It's almost laughable to think that it possibly could. And adding in practice with deep breathing and brain breaks where everybody dances to a YouTube video for 3 minutes, which is incidentally also trying to cram more information about the ABCs into your brain, doesn't make up for the lack of that either. It's like the system is at this new place where it's just this new information, and the system is going, hey, our kids are stressed out. Let's teach them factual information about bodily stress and some prepackaged solutions for de-stressing. And nobody realizes that the reason the kids are stressed in the first place is because they are spending all day, every day in a box that is designed to produce stress in them. Children need to move through the range of feelings in order to figure out how to make sense of those feelings in their bodies. I feel like rather than trying to do something active, parents will tell me that they're trying to co-regulate, and what they mean is they're trying to get their kid to stop crying or stop making a noise or stop whatever, being annoying, being inconvenient. And it might even be legitimate things. Stop throwing things, stop swearing at them, stop, like, these are the legit reasons why parents are feeling like the word co-regulate means stop my kid from doing the thing that they're doing right now. And knowing how to make space for a child to flop around on the ground and moan and cry and feel all the things that they're feeling is the meaning of co-regulating, more than adults focused on the meaning of rush to the end, skip to the part where they are happy and quiet again. I run into that quite a lot in public in England, where I live. England has a more reserved culture than the United States does, where I was born and where I grew up. I think my children are quite shocking to some of the English kids' sensibilities sometimes at playgrounds or things like that. But a huge part of co-regulation and self-regulation is just literally going through the process, not fast forwarding to the end. Whether that's the process in terms of going through emotions when they come up in day-to-day life, whether that's the process in terms of practicing it in all forms of play. But when adults try to skip kids to the end of their feelings in day-to-day life, and then when adults try to sanitize and boss and police kids' play, they take away all of the tools that the kids could possibly have for learning to regulate themselves in healthy ways. And then they wonder why teaching the kids to take deep breaths and count to 3 isn't working. So I understand that this may not help if you're in the trenches with your kid right now. Or if you have a kid who is burned out from years of being crunched through the system. Or if you didn't know about this until recently, or if you've tried other parenting methods that have seemed to disconnect you guys' relationship rather than build it. Or if you're not in control of the kid's whole environment and the kid is subject to loads of other adult control in other settings and you're the only one trying to help them out. Or you're a foster parent or an adoptive parent or other non-traditional caregiver route. And so you're dealing with a kid who has preconceived notions about everything and you don't get to start from square one. There's a million reasons why you might be listening to this and be like, this does not help me. I don't have 6 years of rapport with my kid and we're both drowning right now and they don't trust me and I'm not in a good headspace and they can't self-regulate and I can't co-regulate and nothing is working. Especially adults who didn't have a safe person to co-regulate with when they were a child, or who were primarily parented by having their emotions shut down rather than learning to safely regulate. I absolutely 100% know that somebody is listening who feels this way right now, and I get it. I absolutely get that. Your kids' emotions are, in fact, dragging you all the way into the hole. Every time that they have them, it is dragging you all the way into the hole, and they're having them 300 times a day. I get that. It is going to be hard work to climb back out of that hole. And it is going to set the foundation for your kid knowing how to climb supported out of a hole. All of this work we do, all of this emotional regulation, all of this learning, all of this teaching them how to do it in childhood so that they can live healthy and well in their bodies in their childhood, and so they have it in their adulthood. I, like many of you, didn't have any of this until my adulthood. I lived catastrophically badly in my body in childhood. Even as I was having a good childhood, I had loving parents, I had a safe home. There are 100 other traumas that I could name and none of them touched me. I still had lots of things going on where my emotions were an absolute wreck and I didn't start untangling the mess that it had made until adulthood. So any of the holes that I fell into in adulthood, I was having to learn as an adult newly for the first time how to survive the loss of a loved one, having never been allowed to deeply feel any loss before or how to navigate that depth of grief. So when I say to you, if you are in the trenches with your child right now and you're disconnected and lost and both of you are dysregulated, it is going to be hard work to climb out of that hole. And it is going to be the best and most important thing you can possibly do for them, because you will be teaching them the way out together before they get to adulthood and have to figure out ways out themselves. They will see you learning that alongside them and navigating that at the same time that they are also navigating that. And that will set up that foundation for them forever. It is never too late to build trust with your child again. It is absolutely doable to climb out of the hole. It is hard and it is doable, and things will be good and lovely and worthwhile someday again. It is never too late to learn how to regulate yourself. And in so doing, become the person who can co-regulate with your child and become their safe space, their foundation for a more emotionally healthy adulthood. So how do we do it? Kelsie, get to the point. In the same way that lecturing or berating a child who is dysregulated doesn't fix the problem, neither does beating yourself up when you're dysregulated. Your logic brain is turned off and you just have to power through until you're on the other side, keeping everyone as safe as possible. If beating yourself up worked, it would have worked by now. Did you know that yelling is, from a sensory perspective, a very regulating thing to do? That might sound weird and it might make your brain jump to conclusions that aren't the same as exactly what I'm saying, but think about it for a moment from a mental perspective of thinking of the mechanics of the body. Yelling requires you to take a deep breath, usually to continue deep breathing as well. Yelling produces a sound, which is entirely within your control and usually drowns out many, if not all, of the surrounding sounds in the environment for you, the yeller. Yelling often goes along with opening your jaw to a degree where you can feel a stretch as you forcefully yell whatever it is that you're yelling. Yelling is a powerful, emotional, energetic release. Also, of course, you don't need me to tell you that yelling at somebody in a negative or angry way can be harmful to your relationship with the person and to the emotions of both of you. I sound like ChatGPT if I say that sentence. Adults who struggle with yelling when they're in a challenging situation could be struggling with self-regulation or sensory needs, just like children could. They could be struggling with one or many or all of these things. Meeting a sensory need to cover up the noise in the environment. Kids are getting too loud, so you suddenly snap and yell at them to stop. Your yell covers up the noise briefly, and your body feels like that will help. It is a noise that you are in control of. Yes, it might be adding decibels to the room, but it is a noise that you are in control of. And even if the logical part of your brain knows that that won't help, the part of your brain that is seeking a sensory solution thinks, maybe if I was at least in control of the noise that I was hearing, then the noises wouldn't be hurting me so much. Adults might be meeting a sensory need to have strong, self-regulating proprioceptive. Proprioception is deep body pressure. Pressure in the muscles, stretch, tension, those kinds of things are part of proprioception. Proprioception is very self-regulating, and yelling meets a sensory need to have proprioceptive sensory input through the throat, jaw, tongue, lungs, abdomen. All of those parts, all of those organs, all of those muscles are in stretch and in tension, which gives a deep, powerful burst of proprioceptive regulating input to your physical body. Deep body pressure is one of the fastest and most dependable ways to self-regulate. So your body gets pushed to a point where a switch flips and it goes, I need a burst of regulating sensory input now. Yelling might be meeting a self-regulation need to take a deep breath, because taking a deep breath is not just like nice advice because it is like soothing sounding and makes you be quiet. It is advice because it kicks off a nervous system reaction. When your nervous system is crying out for a deep breath, taking a deep breath can help it regulate. But coupled with the triggers in the environment, the person yelled instead of just taking a breath and not yelling along with it. Yelling might be meeting an anxiety-based need to assure themselves that they do have control over the situation, or that they do have power and are not in fact powerless. Yelling is big and powerful and feels like it'll be reassuring to the body to do a big, powerful move, even if your logic brain knows that it won't actually help anything. It might be meeting an anxiety-based need to suddenly do something rather than nothing, getting pushed past the point where you feel like you need to take action now, so that action comes out of you quick and strong rather than being a measured action. Yelling might be meeting a need for conflict resolution. That's more of a social emotional need, but only knowing how to copy old patterns that were modeled for you. You never saw or learned any way to deal with conflict other than escalating for yelling. A similar social emotional pattern might be that yelling is meeting a need for conflict resolution and doing your absolute best to be an improvement on the worst patterns that were modeled for you that were even more harmful than yelling, but this is just the best that you've got. This is all one example of reframing what it is that you're doing when you're dysregulated, to try and help you find the root and help grow something different from that root instead. If you can take stock of your body and figure out that you, the adult, are yelling because you need to take a deep breath, then you know that the next time you feel the urge to yell, or the urge to get the urge to yell, as far back in the pattern as you can catch it, you know that you can take a deep breath instead. If you know that yelling has nothing to do with needing to take a deep breath and has more to do with you unconsciously copying old patterns, then trying to make sure that your substitution is taking a deep breath may or may not actually help. But what might help is immersing yourself in reading or watching videos of other people's scripts and suggestions and teaching ideas so that you can start feeding your brain new patterns. The key here is that outside of the already out of whack moment, we can learn and practice coping tools. Some popular ones: deep breathing, doing body check-ins where you unclench tension in your jaw and your shoulders and your fists and focus on relaxing your muscles. This forces your body to consciously release its nervous tension that it was using to prepare for a fight or prepare to run away. Sometimes strategically distracting yourself can be a tool, but it should be used appropriately. You can't always check out of every situation. But you might be able to use distraction to get through a moment of crisis into a moment where you will have more resources to handle something. The most powerful thing for me has been practicing pausing. Almost every parenting mistake I regret has been when I snap reacted and did not pause. I try to sit and remind myself, this is not an emergency. There is time to figure out how to react. I sometimes try to predict what my kids are going to do that would be the worst case scenario. He's holding that. If he throws that at me, I'm not going to pick it up and, throw it off to the side. I'm not going to pick it up and break it. I'm not going to yell. If he throws it at me, I'm going to pick it up and put it on top of the refrigerator so he doesn't have access to it anymore, and then we're all going to figure out what to do. He may or may not throw it at me. It's me preemptively informing my brain, I can see the worst case scenario from here. And it's like inoculating yourself against it, because then when it happens, it's not a surprise that you have to react immediately to. And just like my kids practice self-regulation through play, I do it too. I practice pausing in times when I don't actually need to pause. Nobody's dysregulated. Nobody's on the brink of becoming dysregulated. My kid's like, can we have some grapes? And I practice having a whole entire conscious thought. I think to myself, grapes. Yes, we can have some grapes. Good idea. And then I say out loud, grapes. Yes, we can have some grapes. Good idea. And then I get the grapes or whatever. I've practiced having a whole conscious thought and having it before I say the thought out loud. So my body gets used to the fact that I can finish the whole conscious thought. I can take the whole processing time that it takes to do the whole conscious thought and not just respond or react to it. Especially if as a kid, you had adults who were like, answer me, or wouldn't give you a second to practice pausing and practice thinking about what it was that you wanted to say. Tell me the answer. Give me your answer right now. Hey, I'm talking to you. If you had somebody harping on you that way, your body has gotten used to the fact that whatever somebody spits at you, you need to answer it right this second. And so it takes time to rewire your brain to say, actually, when somebody asks me a question, it's not a demand that needs me to answer within 1 millisecond of my life, because whatever comes out of your mouth is just going to be your impulse, your instinct. And that may or may not be what you want to actually act on. If it is, like me saying, yes, we can have some grapes, like I didn't change that thought. It was my impulsive thought, and it was the one that we eventually went with. That was fine. But I'm practicing the fact that I take the breath, that I take the pause, that I let myself think it through. And I'm modeling for my kids not being the adult who's on them like, answer me now, because they know that they can also take a second, process what I said, think about any ramifications of it that they need to, and then respond. The more that we practice, the stronger our regulation pathway becomes. That makes it ever easier for us to access, and that models for our children how they can do it. First, they co-regulate in time with us. Later, they copy what they have seen us do. If you are all the way in the trenches with your child, I think the first thing you do is drop everything that you possibly can that you expect of your child and that you expect of yourself. And mega prioritize as hard as you possibly can, doing whatever it would take to get yourself, not your child, not looking at them yet, to get yourself to a place of at least short bursts of regulation. Maybe you cannot get your whole life back on track in a day when you are all the way burnt out and everything is terrible, but maybe you can get to the point where you feel like you can manage things for the first hour of the morning and then things start going wrong. Or maybe there's an hour from 5 to 6 p.m. after everybody's eaten dinner that everybody's doing okay, and then you roll right into bedtime struggles or whatever it is. And then start building relationship connecting things with your child into that brief moment of time where you are regulated and you are pulled together. Whatever that looks like. We're dropping as many expectations as we can drop, as we can comfortably drop. So what that means, you offer them ice lollies for breakfast and ask them no questions at all and tell them that you think that they're a lovely person to be around. Do that. If you say nothing at all about the thing that they dropped on the floor that's supposed to go somewhere else, and you don't ask them at all about how school was, you just tell them softly and genuinely, I was thinking about you today. And you play a video game alongside them. Don't say anything at all. Build them something silly in Minecraft. Think about what their love language is, if you've heard of love languages, and see if there's a way you could meet them in that, whether that's spending time, acts of service, doing something for them, giving them affirming words about who they are, being more huggy or snuggly, even if that's not your thing. And then gifts, like it doesn't have to be buying them something. You can make them something. You could find them something that they like, saying, I thought of you and I got you this. Set yourself a mental goal and try to do this once a week, twice a month, whatever you can do without burning yourself back out. And then try to pepper the rest of the time with little one-sentence moments if you possibly can, whether that's make a conscious effort to tell them you love them, why you love them, you think they're cool, not making such a huge deal out of it that you're trying to embarrass them, not trying to elicit a reaction from them, just like it's such an obvious fact of life that it's going to come out in conversation sometimes. Maybe you can't even manage that yet. Maybe what you can do is set your brain to mute on the things that you would have nitpicked at before. Maybe that's the first step that you can take. If you would have told them 15 times in the day what they were doing wrong, maybe you tell them 2 that were super duper important, like don't run into that road, cars are there, or whatever it is. In addition to the relationship building, I urge you to ask yourself what you can accept. The hardest times in my parenting journey have been when I simply refuse to accept how things would be for a little while. And it usually is a little while, or maybe even a long while. And these things shifted the most imaginable when the only thing that changed was that I accepted them. For a while, when he started school, my son would have a screaming, throwing things, raging meltdown at bedtime every single day. I knew he was tired. I had moved his bedtime as early as it could possibly be humanly reasonable. He was still doing it. He would come home from school. We would not ask him to do one single thing in the entire afternoon, 0 demands. The last thing of the day was that we had to put bedtime underwear on him so that he wouldn't wet the bed, and nothing else. I would try to brush his teeth for him. If we couldn't, we would skip toothbrushing. Sometimes we even skip bedtime underwear, and I just snuck in after he was asleep and put down a pad or changed his clothes. And even with as few demands as I could possibly think of, he was still raging and melting down every single day. And we looked at everything at school, and is this too hard for him? And what can we do here? And he was loving it. He was loving every part of school. It was just that hard to be coming out of COVID and into socializing with people the whole entire day. It just was. I took this as a sign of my own failing. I questioned myself. I felt like an imposter for doing these kind of talks and writing on my Facebook page if I couldn't even help fix my own kid. And then it took a conversation with my friend for me to realize that that's how I was seeing it, that I needed to fix my kid. And once instead I fixed my own framework to realize maybe this is just how it is right now, the whole thing became so different. Nothing changed about my son at all. I just went into bedtime thinking, I will tuck my daughter into bed. Then I will go sit with my son with my arms open in case he wants cuddles while he cries and lets all his feelings out, rather than thinking, I sure hope he doesn't cry today, when all evidence was that he had done it daily for like 2 weeks. And then he grew right out of that phase. It was probably 4 weeks long. I didn't even notice when he did. I wasn't desperate for it to end anymore. I had totally accepted that he was so tired, and it was all so new, and it was, even if it was delightfully new, it was so overwhelming and overstimulating that the way that he could get through that at the end of the day was by crying in order to process it and in order to release enough emotion to be able to fall asleep. And once I accepted it, it stopped being rage and it started just being crying while I hugged my mom, because he didn't need to fight to defend his right to process those emotions in that way anymore, like he did when I was unconsciously fighting him on it. Drop everything you can possibly drop. Accept everything you can possibly accept. Regulate yourself as much as you can possibly regulate yourself. Start looking for short bursts where you are regulated enough to connect with your child and start building a foundation of connection. Ask yourself where, if anywhere, you might be able to let them practice regulation in ways that are play-based or otherwise just practice and don't have actual emotional precursors involved. Can you guys listen to rock music in the car and shout the lyrics to them together? Can you guys roughhouse and practice getting your energy up and then back down? Can you spend more time climbing something or lifting heavy things or building something or working on a physical, heavy, involved project together? Digging, pushing, pulling, creating, climbing, building. My child has a tendency, same kid, he's the one who fits this talk the most, has a tendency to go through long periods of time where he's happy to play at his own level of ability, and then for some reason he'll get completely obsessed with something just like a little bit too hard for him, and he'll hyper focus on it to the point of rage when he can't do it, and he'll just do it over and over and over and over and over until he can. I've talked on my page about him doing this at playgrounds before. He got himself completely stuck in a spiral ladder that went like this when he was like 3, because he got himself stuck into the middle of it while he was trying to learn how to climb it. He got himself stranded on a walled and perfectly safe bridge, like sturdy, safe, didn't even wiggle, just was high, sobbing and looking down at the ground through the holes in it that he wanted to climb when he was 4. He spent time screaming at the top of his lungs at a skateboard quarter pipe when he was 5 that he wanted to climb it. And I always take it as an opportunity for me to practice sitting with my own feelings of discomfort and working on my empathy tone of voice, because he'll always come to me and say, I can't do it, and beg me to do it for him or to pick him up and put him on it or whatever. And I tell him, I won't just pick you up. You'll be ready to do it when your body's able to do it. It's okay if your body's not able to do it. I'm here for you regardless. You can come sit with me. We have a snack, we have water. And he'll go back to it again and again and again and again. And suddenly, somehow, he'll always do it. I always wonder if the screaming and crying and raging is going to distract him and defeat his own purpose and stop him from reaching his goal. And then I always watch him figure it out. Then the last thing that I would recommend, whether you're coming at this information from about regulation from in the trenches, or whether you're just trying to come at it from a more informed place, no matter what your family is feeling like lately, I would recommend learning more, doing more research, reading more about interoception, the sense of your inner body. You, the adult, the caregiver, learn about it, and then also model that and teach that for your children. Interoception is the sense of what's going on inside your body. It can be broken into 2 parts, emotional feelings and biological feelings. In English, we use the word feeling to mean both, so it gets a little bit messy as you try to discuss it. Biological feelings can be a little bit more straightforward to understand. I need to use the toilet. I'm hungry. I'm thirsty. I'm sleepy, things like that. And then emotional feelings, of course, are your emotions, but they're also tied to physical sensations. At its most basic, interoception is your inner body sense, but there are a lot of inner body sensations, and some of them your brain filters out, and some of them are so powerful that they're overtaking it. And ascribing those things meaning is like a whole other part of the puzzle. Are you able to notice the sensation itself? Are you able to take the sensation and interpret meaning from it? That's interoception. It's an intensely personal study because people's interpretations might be different, because people's bodies communicate in different ways. Maybe when I notice my hands starting to get hot and sweaty, I realize I'm anxious about something. But you notice your hands getting hot and sweaty and you realize you're angry about something. And then somebody else's hands start to get hot and sweaty and it just means they need to take off their jacket. These are vastly different interpretations and they might all be right. This all obviously ties in with regulation too, because you're interpreting the sensations that are happening in your body. I can tell that I'm starting to get dysregulated when it feels like my throat has swelled up and I can't speak. I can tell that I'm starting to get dysregulated when it feels like my ears are on fire or that something making contact with my skin is making it burn and I need to get it off. These are all physical sensations. I don't have to name the emotion associated with it. I might be able to say, I can tell that I'm dysregulated when I get anxious. I can tell that I'm dysregulated when I get sad. But those actually give me less actionable things to do than I can tell that I'm dysregulated when my throat starts to close off. That's more measurable than, am I sad? Am I not sad? I don't know. I can't quite tell yet. Because of this can be super important for kids who are neurodivergent in any way, or even just for kids who are young, kids who struggle with language, for any reason. It would be impossible for me to come and stand in your body. So it is impossible for me to tell you exactly what emotion you are feeling. I might be able to make a reasonable guess, but it's not guaranteed to be right. And people do a lot of things that don't fit the mold. A really common one is that toddlers and young children laugh when their body is nervously dysregulated and out of whack. But often their adults will interpret it as like defiance, or that they're rude, or that they're laughing because they think that it's funny that they did something wrong. So rather than project the emotional word on what the thing it is that I'm observing in myself or others, I can just identify exactly what the feelings are, however those feel. There are a few resources like Autism Level Up that are working on creating alternate feeling words that aren't things like sad, mad, happy, but are things like buzz, flame, too much, blub, blub, blub. And they come with really cool visuals so that the child can look at them and connect with them on a internal sensation level that may not be able to be interpreted to an emotional word. I've seen the speech therapist, Tara Sumter, suggest you can use colors or characters or descriptions. She gave examples like, it feels like a river in my chest, or it feels like bluey in my heart, or it feels red in my throat. And those would be personal and explained between the caregiver and the child more than anyone else. My own son used to tell me, it will hurt my eyes, when he meant that something was taking too long and making him feel, I would put my best guess as impatient or full of longing for it to happen. If he said, when is Christmas? And I said, it is in 34 days. He would say, that will hurt my eyes. He's not old enough or articulate enough to be able to explain to me why it would hurt his eyes. But he came up with that on his own and expressed it. And that language meant exactly what it needed to mean for him. So when schools and teachers and caregivers and parents try to teach kids self-regulation, this is another area where it might miss the mark. Not that their work isn't important or isn't good, but it's so generalized that it may be meaningless if the child is missing interoceptive cues. Because another key piece of the puzzle is that interoception can be too strong, too weak, it can be distorted, and it may not be the same across body parts. Maybe you're really sensitive to noticing when you're first hungry, and you know the exact minute of the day that you need to have your first snack, but you don't notice that you need to urinate until like 4 seconds before you're going to burst. So if we're looking at a child who goes into a rage all the time, and their school and their caregivers are all trying to teach them how to self-regulate with coping strategies, take deep breaths when you're mad, go for a walk when you're mad, listen to music when you're mad, even if you try to narrow down exactly which ones do work for the kid instead of coming to them with prepackaged ones, all of those things might be fine, but they all rely on the child being able to notice when they're angry. And we might think, well, of course you can tell when you're getting angry. It's when stuff makes you angry. But you can see how vague that is. Maybe the child doesn't actually notice at all what it is that is the precursor to them getting angry. Interoception is so intensely personal. And it can be a much more challenging learning experience for autistic and, in a greater sense, for all neurodiverse people. Being aware of its existence as one of the body senses is a great first step. Naming the way that you're feeling in terms of more of a descriptive, more of an exact description of what you're feeling instead of going to emotion words can sometimes help. I do this with my students all the time. I was walking to the OT room with 2 students who I was going to see together in a group session, and one of them was going, I'm a frog, I'm a kangaroo, I'm a rabbit. And I might have put an interpretation on that. I might have said, you look like you're feeling excited. But rather than say that, I said, you look like you're feeling jumpy, because what I know is that they are jumping up and down and they look like they're feeling jumpy. You look like you have jumpy energy in your body. And my other student who was walking with us in the group said, I'm feeling runny and typey, because he wanted to run ahead to the room and he wanted to type on his favorite typing game that he was excited to see when he was in my room. And I love that. That told me he knew exactly what he was feeling. He could have said, if I had said to the first student, you look like you're feeling excited, he might have said, I'm feeling excited. And that would have been fine, but it wouldn't have necessarily given me the actionable information of, you're feeling like you want to go ahead and run. I understand that. We need to walk because we're in the hall and I can't keep line of sight of you. I didn't say any of that. I was just thinking it. So I was thinking, okay, this student is very impulsive. If he bolts and runs, I will at least know why. I will know that it is out of excitement, that he's running towards the typing game. I will know where I will be able to find him. And he gave me an advance warning of like a couple of seconds so that I could intervene if I needed to and be like, oh, all right, we're all feeling really, really runny and jumpy and jazzed about this. So what if we like do some huge stomps or something like that that'll burn some of that energy out? And so just the process of naming exactly what the thing was instead of trying to put an emotion word on it is what made that conversation possible. Kelly Mahler is another OT who's got loads of resources about interoception. She's got a lot of free things on her website, and she's got a lot of paid things as well. She's the foremost researcher, leading expert on interoception. She's writing cutting edge stuff all the time, and I learned everything that I know from her. So these are some areas where you can look up some more research if you need, because I know this was a very, very brief overview and very regulation heavy. I know this has been a lot of theory and not a lot of like case studies, just a few personal stories. I have many, many more in my mind, but the theory is what feels like it applies to everyone. And sometimes it's hard to pull the right things out of the case studies or highly specific answers. But I try to leave a lot of time here at the end so that I can get through some questions, because I know there are a lot of us here. And so we can jump into that right now.
Great stuff. Oh my gosh, the chat is just going off. And a lot of it is, thank you, Kelsie, and you're amazing, and what a great bunch of information. So there's just so much love in the chat for you right now. But I've got some solid questions. I'm doing this anonymously for there's little love hearts coming now after me saying that. So I'm doing this anonymously because this is a recording. It may end up on the Neurodiversity Ireland website, and I don't really want to name kids or families. So I've taken notes. I'm going to give you the questions that came up first, and I think, guys, what I'm going to do for the rest of you is that if Kelsie doesn't get to these questions today, that maybe I'll pop the questions over to her, and she may address them in her Facebook page at some point or another. I haven't asked her that. I'm just assuming that might happen. So but yeah, so I'll pass them on in any case, or I may even try to help you guys out with what little bit I know about this stuff. But anyway, so back to you, Kelsie. So the yeah, so how do you want to do this? Do you want to leave your PowerPoint up, or do you want to come
Oh yeah, sorry, I can stop sharing so that you can see my face.
Yeah.
Nope. Stop. There we go.
Perfect. Great. And I'm gonna pin you here. There you are. Yay. Okay, yeah, another really helpful comment there. Okay, so what is the most helpful, practical way to help a child who struggles moving between environments, like a very busy school environment to the home environment? And I imagine that's kind of a how long is a piece of string sort of question. So do you have thoughts on that?
So a lot of times if somebody has difficulty moving from one thing to the next thing, or difficulty with transitions, it can come from difficulty with ending the last thing. It can come with difficulty with starting the next thing, or both. And so I personally don't have a lot of difficulty with ending a last thing, but I have a lot of difficulty with starting a new thing, just personally speaking. And so when I know that I'm going to need to start a new thing, I try to break it into the very smallest possible step possible, and carry myself with whatever momentum or bribe or whatever I have to do that very tiny first step. And I say bribe kind of tongue in cheek, because I do a lot of things in my family and in my own life where a bribe is actually holding power over a child, but this is something that I do in cooperation with a child, or if it's myself, in cooperation with myself. Obviously, I don't have any way to hold power over myself. And so if that means that, you know, the child has to, for example, come out of the school, get into the car, and that's just like a big struggle. Buckling the seatbelt is a big struggle. Everything is, is really hard for them. Then, you can start looking at ways to either like make that have somebody who can do it along with them, because like doing something with a buddy can sometimes make it less difficult. So rather than the parent drive through the car line, maybe they can come into the school and meet the child, or something like that. I know that's not always possible. Sometimes the kids have to do the things by themselves or go get on the bus themselves. Maybe you take away the expectation that they need to buckle their own seatbelt, and you're like, well, they're 9, they can do this motion, like they can buckle their own seatbelt, but maybe the amount of steps that they could take was get in the car and sit my butt in the seat. And then the step that you can meet them at is I will pull into a parking spot. I will get out of the car and walk around to you and buckle your seatbelt for you and tell you, oh my gosh, I love you. I missed you today. You know, maybe it means you have a snack that they like that, you know, is maybe like, pair something sweet with something protein or something like that. So you get a little burst of dopamine hit as well as like something nourishing. So like, you know, you've got whatever, apples with peanut butter or apples with peanut butter and chocolate chips on them, or a protein bar, or, you know, something like whatever that looks like. And so that it's not a bribe in the sense that you're like, get into the car and then I'll give you your snack and you need to blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's just part of the routine. Like the snack is here, is waiting for you. It's sitting in the car. There it is. Hop in. I'll help you with whatever else you need help with, you know, kind of thing. And so, so sometimes kind of just like taking little steps to make the environment more delightful. What I do for myself a lot of the time when I need to write my OT notes at the end of the day, and I'm like, I'm exhausted. I'm tired of thinking. My brain is off. And I will just sit in front of my open computer for embarrassingly long time. But if I can open the file finder and open the document in which I write my notes, and the document is there instead of just the blank computer screen, for some reason, taking that tiny little the first hurdle step of the document's open, I might as well write the notes. Like it's not that physically clicking on a file is hard, like in terms of motor skills or abilities that I have. It's that something about emotionally getting the thing started is hard. And so if emotionally getting the thing started is hard, then look at how you can, if you think of it as them having to take a big step, you know, up the first step, think about all the things you can do to erode that step all the way down, so that instead they're just having to take a little step. And that's the first step. And then the rest of the momentum, you just keep going. If it's hard to stop the last thing, then that's like kind of a different tactic, or it could be both. Like I said, it could be both things that are affecting somebody. Sometimes taking a transition object from the last thing to the next thing, because especially kids who struggle to like remember what thought it was they were having, what idea it was that they were doing, what state of flow they were just in. They might even be thinking in school, like, I'm so psyched about this thing that I'm reading or this thing that I'm writing or whatever, and now I have to end it and I have to go out and I want to tell my parent about it, but I'm going to forget what it was by the time I get there, or by the time I get there, I'm going to be dysregulated because all the tiredness comes crashing in. I'm sure everybody has experienced having been in like a state of flow where you're super enjoying the thing that you're doing and working on, and then you get ripped out of that by like something happening, or, you know, a big noise happens, or someone needs your attention immediately, and it's like, I'm not even going to get back into that creative state. Like I was enjoying that. And so sometimes taking a transition object, or taking a like, you know, I was writing the thing and I can just pick up my paper and I can take it with me and I can show it to my mom and tell my mom about it, or whatever it is, can sometimes help. Or taking a transition delight. I haven't ever used that phrase before, but I'm going to use it again in the future. I listen to music as I walk out of the school, or I have my snack in my backpack and I get it out and I eat it as I walk out of the school. It's not even waiting for me in the car. It was right here in my hand, or whatever it is. Things where you can make the conclusion of something a little more delightful, or make the initiation of something a little less hard, a little more delightful, would be the first tactics that I would take in looking at someone who struggles a lot with transitioning from one thing to another.
That's great. Thanks for that. Yeah, and so there's an adult question actually that I think is kind of important, because a lot of us are probably neurodiverse also. So someone is asking, and several people came in after them saying, yes, great question. So it's a lot of us. So how do you, as a neurodiverse individual who is also triggered, start to manage the situation when you're also pushed out of your emotional regulation state?
So I do think that some of the things that I was listing through the rest of the talk are real important parts of that. If you're finding yourself consistently being pushed into a state of dysregulation, then you need to take steps back to figure out what you can accept that you're not accepting right now, what you can manage in the environment that is currently going unmanaged, what you can do to set it up ahead of time. If this is like every day this happens, or every time they do X, I do Y, or whatever, you in your adult capacity to reason into the future can start reflecting on that and figuring out what steps you can take to do that. If it's like weird things pop up and you know, there was no way to predict this, there's a blogger who I like, whose name is Kristen Longfegan, and she gave the example of like, sometimes you don't need to make a plan for everything. If the baby got out of the bath and went running down the stairs and knocked over the plant, and the cat was there and picked up the cat and got the cat all wet, and while the cat was upset, the cat went and scratched the couch, you probably don't need to make a plan for what happens if the baby gets out of the tub and runs down the stairs and knocks over the, like, that's not going to happen. And you yelled, like, that was your reaction to it. You yelled and everyone was sad and everyone was mad for a little bit. Okay. You don't need to be like beating yourself up for this event happening, and like, in the future when the baby gets out of the tub, I'll just grab him with a towel. Like, you don't need to, this is not going to happen again. This was a one-time thing. Sometimes weird things happen. And so if you can identify a pattern in all the one weird things that are happening, like all my every time I stop paying attention to what my kids are doing and start tuning into my phone, then my kids start getting real overwhelmed and clamoring for my attention, and it escalates and pops off from there until I yell at them. Like, okay, maybe that's a pattern that you notice, even if it happened in 5 distinct events or whatever. But basically, I've written a very long post before about, because of the other, this is like the adult version of the most common thing people ask me about kids. The most common thing people ask me about kids is like, but what about when they are hitting me, and when they are yelling at me, and when they are throwing stuff, and they are already out of whack. It is already melting down. It is already the worst. What do I do when it is already the worst? And my answer is really just survive. Like, I don't have 5 magic tools to get out of that moment. That with time, that moment will pass. Nobody is melting down extendedly for 3 years straight, even if it feels like they are. You mean that there are a series of different meltdowns and that they're never getting back to good regulation, but you don't mean that my baby actually screamed for 3 years. Like, that isn't a thing. There are moments of regulation in between it. So that moment will pass. You have to get through that moment, whatever that takes. If that means that you walk away from your kids and shut yourself in the bathroom because that that's the best way to keep you safe and the kids safe, then you walk away from your kids and shut yourself in the bathroom. If that means that you bear hug your kid and pull them down onto the couch with you and are like, I'm going to hold on to you until you are safe. Sometimes that is what that looks like, depending on what age they are, depending on what we're talking about happening here. And so it's the same thing with yourself. If you are dysregulated and you are yelling, and even as you're yelling, this is dumb. Like, why am I yelling? This isn't helping anybody. Sometimes you just got to get through that moment. And then when you're not in the moment, is all the planning and all the work is in the not in that moment. And so that frustrates people, both with kids and maybe with themselves or with adults, because they're thinking, I never want to make the moment happen again. I want there to be no moment ever again from here on out. And that's not going to happen. All you can do is try to set up the environment all you can, practice the coping tools all you can. I encountered a real big shift in my own self and life when I'm trying to think how to word this. Before the big shift, I was so ashamed of my own behavior when we were in that moment, of how I would yell or how I would flip out. I was so ashamed of it that later I wouldn't even think about it or acknowledge it in any way, because it was a self-defense mechanism from my own childhood, that I just won't ever acknowledge anything that is that shameful, or that I was that out of control. And when I got to a point, and maybe, people would have different opinions on this. So maybe people would say, you're giving yourself too much grace or whatever. You're not even giving it to your kids, kind of thing. But when I got to a point where I could say about sometime when my kid did something and I yelled at them, and like objectively from an outside observer, I was in the wrong and my kid was fine, But when I could say, my poor self, I know that sounds a little silly or embarrassing to say out loud, but like, my poor small self it's making me emotional, who didn't learn a better tool than this, who's trying their best. When I got to the point where I could see my own self with grace instead of with shame, then that opened up the capacity that I had to also reflect on what happened and be able to think, okay, when did that start to go bad? It started to go bad when he was trying to build stuff with his blocks and they kept falling over. And then at first, when I was early on this journey, I would just go back out of whack about that again, then I'd be like, well, what am I supposed to do? I can't stop the laws of physics. He's trying to build something impossible, blah, 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 you know, and I would never get anywhere. And then the next time that it happened, I would be like, okay, where did it start to go wrong? It started to go wrong when he was trying to build stuff out of blocks and the stuff was just falling over. Okay, what was my part in that? Well, my part in that is that he came over to me and he said, you know, he was already crying and yelling because the stuff was going wrong. And I was already getting out of whack too, because his yelling was dysregulating me. And so I was just looking at my phone because I was just trying so hard to distract myself from the moment that I wouldn't flip into yelling. But then I did flip into yelling anyway, because then I was like, fine, what do you want? Blah, blah, blah. I can't fix the laws of physics, you know? And so once I got to a point where I could reflect on the things that happened and how they happened for my own self, I noticed that a huge, constant, perpetual overhanging trigger was just noise, just literal volume. And I started carrying earplugs in my pocket every day of my life, and every moment of my day. And I took the steps that I needed to be able to make that happen. I stopped wearing pants that didn't have pockets. I put a reminder in my phone for the morning that said, put earplugs in your pocket. And then I put a reminder in my phone for the evening that said, put earplugs on your nightstand, so that I would stop washing them in the washer. And then I figured out situations, because at first I was like, oh, well, I'll put earplugs in when I start to get overwhelmed. And then there were times where I would start to get overwhelmed and my start to am was too short. So then I started being like, on a weekday, when I come home from work, I put earplugs into my ears. It doesn't matter if I feel like I'm feeling good, we're going to have a great time with the kids today. I would put earplugs in my ears and I have a great time with the kids and it's slightly muted. That is fine. Like I just, once I could reflect on this with grace and not shame, and say, without getting so ashamed that I had to turn away from my own self, once I could say, what part did I have in this? Okay, assume it will happen again tomorrow. What will I do different then? That literally, more than probably any other thing, shifted my ability to parent through dysregulated moments, which I am still not perfect of. I like snapped and yelled at my kids like a week ago. So like, this is not even slightly me being like, and now I'm this ascended person who never ever does it. Like, that's not even a little bit. But a big part of that reflection was that I started writing about it for the internet. And so then I was like, now in moments that this is happening, in my brain, there is a running monologue that is what I would type out if I got around to typing it out. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. So I would encourage people to try like journaling or something like that, if that feels like it's something to them, because I don't think it has to do with people reading it. I think it has to do with me writing it. Me writing it makes me think about it as a series of interconnected steps, and not what people very commonly tell me, which is like, he flips out for no reason. I flip out for no reason. Everything's not happening for no reason. Everything's happening for something. Something is causing it. Something is the precursor. And if you can figure out how to identify that, and that means being able to look at your own self and look at the thing that you did and look at how you could do it different, and that not mean you're the worst person ever, you're the worst mom, you're the worst dad, you're the worst parent, you suck, you're a terrible person, nobody else parents as bad as you, blah, 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 all these things that we tell ourselves when we get like bogged down into this feeling of shame overriding everything else. Once you can do that, and once you can be able to reflect, then you can be able to figure out how to take next steps, instead of just being like, good Lord, thank God they're all in bed, I'm not going to think about the kids until tomorrow morning, because then you wake up again and you can't be picking the things in the moment. You can't be fixing the environment in the moment. You can't be coming up with solutions in the moment. And it's totally reasonable that after they go to bed, you're like so tired you don't even want to think about it. But that's like, you just have to find some time too. And that's why I said in the thing, find the way to carve out 1 hour of regulated time for yourself. Find that, you don't have to claw your way back to 24 hours of good times all day, every day. First thing, that's not the goal. Find a way to have a good hour a day, and then start using that hour to build on it, put a crowbar into it and build on it.
Yeah. For me, apologizing too was a really big thing. I practice mindfulness, and
Absolutely.
I refer to this as retroactive mindfulness, because I realize that I have totally screwed up and that I'm part of the problem, and then I go back for the repair. And I've read several psychologists saying that the repair is more important than not having a problem.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you saying that, because it was in my mind a few times while I was talking, but it never came out. But I also will just openly say that I have times where the shame voice is still there so hard that I'm like, I need to apologize. And my apology sounds like a grumpy 4-year-old whose mom is making them apologize. I'm like, I should not have yelled. Sorry. And like, that's as far as I've got right now. But that's as far as I've got right now. So that's what we're going to go with. And, then like later, much later, like after, hours have gone by or whatever, I just make absolutely sure that, while we're going to bed or whatever, that I'm like, hey, I love you. You're a great kid, and I don't even have to go back and say like, remember how I yelled? I shouldn't. My kids are very little still. If they were old enough to like hold grudges, then I would probably need to tweak it. But I think that even doing the like, as early as you can manage the apology, and then like just kind of continuing to repair from there. Cause it's like, you're the first one saying, listen, olive branch, we're going to move past this. We acknowledge things in this family. We don't just not acknowledge them and then pretend they don't exist. I should not have yelled. Sorry. That might be all I've got. And then like, I could type out like a flowery apology if I could type it, but that's what will come out of my mouth.
Yeah. And I just want to offer one more thing. I know that the Neurodiversity Ireland people have heard me say this before, that I learned something in Mindfulness in Schools project called Stop and Be. It's called .be. And to stop this regular event of fighting with my kid over his shoes because of the transition thing that you talked about earlier, literally just felt my feet on the floor was enough to stop me from getting angry after asking for the 700th time to please put on your shoes so that we can go, and literally, because I would know it was happening, I'm going to get mad, and I would just feel my feet on the ground. And it was enough. It's that pause you mentioned earlier. It was enough to disrupt the anger or the frustration or the part of me that's saying he's being defiant, when really it was that he was not able for the transition. Yeah, so thanks for that. And then, so I think what I'm going to ask you one more question, because I feel like we've kept you a very long time.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe one more would be good, because I also
and I'm going to sort of merge three together. So you've talked about this already. There's one parent that's worried that their 7 and 9-year-old are already damaged from them not empathizing enough or not having enough sort of unstructured play. And then I guess part two, that would be, there are lots of people asking about what it looks like to transition from being unregulated to being more regulated for the child. Like, so kind of what are the steps that would be happening for the kid?
So I think it's Ross Green who says he writes collaborative practice solutions, and he says like throwers throw, hitters hit, screamers scream, swearers swear, like everybody's got a thing that is the thing that they reach for. And so like my kid's a thrower. And so a big shift in the steps of like becoming more regulated has been going from like throw this instantaneously to like as he got older and got more mature, it's like, like, I'm so mad, I'm gonna throw this, and like not reacting to that the same way, because that's not the same, that's not the same thing. Some people act like that's the same level of threat. And I think that a big shift that is that I've seen with my own children and with the children that I work with, that's a pretty small sample size, so I'm not saying that this is definitely universal, but just in my own experience, a big shift that I've seen is going from mad, or if I'm trying to not name the emotion, going from body actions that would suggest mad to sad or scared, or there are definitely times where it's right to feel mad. Like there are definitely times when angry is the correct, response emotion. But there are also times where, especially kids who've been through this for years and years, or have a very reactive, system, or have some kind of neurodivergence, or whatever it is, there are definitely times where the kid is coming out the gate with mad because it's the safer one than any of the other things would be, because at least if they're mad, then they're bringing a fight to this fight and not just alone in it, or and not just not having to deal with how vulnerable it is to be something else than mad when you're dysregulated, when you're out of whack. And so again, that's not saying that mad is the wrong emotion to that, because there are definitely like kids who I work with at school where it's like, you have been crunched through a system for like 6 years of your life, and it is not working for you, and nobody is acknowledging you, and nobody is accommodating you, and you could do wonderful if you just had these things, and it's like, so every time something goes wrong, they're just at a hair trigger ready to be mad about it. I'm not saying that being mad is the wrong emotion there at all. It's like a systemic injustice, and that's a very valid reaction to that. But also I think you can be sad that nobody has noticed you. You can be sad that nobody is helping you, but that's a much more vulnerable emotion. And so where I have seen my own children make progress in their journey from, co-regulation to self-regulation, which is still a very long journey ahead of us. My children are 6 and 4. I'm not talking like these are adult things, but where I have seen progress is that instead of being like, this thing went wrong, I better get ready to fight everyone in the world about it and screw everybody and everything, and I'm gonna throw down and burn everything down. My kids have gotten to a place where they could be like, this went wrong, that is devastating, where is my mom, I want to cry on her, and like that's a different, nobody's choosing that. The kid is not sitting there and being like, this is going wrong, should I be mad or should I be sad? That is telling me that instinctually in their body they already are so known and so used to the fact that I will walk that regulation pathway with them over and over, that they could be like, this is devastating, where's my mom? And not, this is devastating, I better fight everybody and everything that comes at me. And so I think that it can be really hard to, I mentioned a lot of reasons why people might be needing to, they might be like, more or less legitimate sounding reasons or whatever. Like you might be changing your mind and your kid's already 15, or you might be, you've tried everything else and nothing else worked. And now you're finding out about other parenting paradigms, or your whole life you thought that they were just, just doing it. They were just being defiant. They were just whatever. And only now you're reconsidering that, or you might be their foster parent or their adoptive parent, and so you didn't even get a chance to lay the groundwork. It can feel so overwhelming when the groundwork wasn't laid the way that you wish it had been. But I truly don't believe, as long as you both are alive, that there's ever a point where it's too late to say, even to your adult kid, like, hey, there was someone who I follow on Instagram named Dr. Becky Kennedy, I think.
Great. Yeah.
And her blog is Dr. Becky at Good Inside. And she talked about, like, you as an adult right now, imagine if your parent called you or wrote you a letter, or if your parent has passed away, that you imagine finding a letter in their belongings or something like that said, like, dear you, I feel like there were these things that I did wrong while I was raising you. I have carried them for a long time, and I feel regret about them, and I feel remorse about them, and I wish that I had known then what I know now, and I would like to repair that relationship, or I would like to, I know that you may not trust me for every single little thing, but I would like to take whatever steps it is that we can take. And most adults doing that thought exercise, despite being adults, feel very profoundly, of a reaction to the thought of their parent still approaching them and saying that to them. And so I think that there's no way that you could possibly say that your kid is too old, or your kid, your relationship is irreparably damaged, or there's nothing that you can do to try to mitigate that, or to try to become that person. Because even if you were becoming it in more of like a friend or a peer role than in a, like fully parenting role, like you do with a 2-year-old, like kind of thing, I still think that that there's still room for that to take place, that growth to take place, that change in you guys' relationship to take place, and for you to model, if nothing else, to model, like, I learned new things, that even if you're, because like, if your child's an adult, or if your child's an older teenager, they might be like, screw you, I'm not listening to what you're saying, but you're still modeling, like, I learned enough new things, I believed this enough, that I was, I was willing to start to make changes, and that will always be there in the back of their mind as something that you showed them. Like, I, as an adult, grew and changed, and I know this new pathway, and I would walk it with you too if you wanted somebody there with you, kind of thing.
Great. Thanks so much for that. And just to add to that, I didn't even pick up any of this stuff until my kid was 6. And I'm certainly not an expert at it. And I mess up all the time and lose my temper and learn to just apologize and interrupt myself when I can. So I think that for all of you out there that are parents that are struggling, like we're all in this. We've all been there. And none of us are perfect at it. So just keep finding those moments. Just keep finding that pause, like Kelsie said, and finding those moments. I'm going to let you go. You've given us so much tonight. Thank you so much. And this chat is so full of love for you that I'm also going to send it to you. And if you feel like, I think, did you say that you have a search function on your Facebook page?
I do. And then I have search on my website as well. And it's a little more categorized on my website. I know that on my website, then there's a header that has like by age, by location, by domain. And so you can look at by age, okay, everything about babies, everything about toddlers, everything about, all the way up. And then by domain, okay, everything about, and regulation is one of the things on there. Domain, I have, I believe, fine motor, sensory, social, emotional, regulation, and one other thing that I can't think of right now. But and so if you want more about regulation, you can go to that. It's really easy to search, or you can search the terms co-regulation, self-regulation, or just regulation and just read more things about them. You can search the term interoception if you want to find out more information about that. Or you can search by the age of your child, or there's a whole category for self-adult where I'm talking about myself or talking about other adults and going on your own journey. And so, but you can type, there are more posts on Facebook because Facebook was I don't have my whole backlog onto my website yet, but all of the new stuff from the last year or so is probably all of what's mainly worth reading anyway. And that's all on the website. So,
so I just want to encourage you, if you have asked a question that I didn't get to tonight, because my God, there were so many, and I did my best to kind of merge a few together if I felt I saw them a few times. But do look at Kelsie's stuff. Do search first, because there's so much information on her Facebook page. I haven't seen your website yet, but I can't wait. And then I'm also going to send this chat over to her so that if there's something in there that she feels like she wants to address, then she can pick it up from there. Is that okay with you, Kelsie?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this recording is going to be not only available for people who were here, but just available in general, I think.
Yep.
Right?
So if you're happy to share it on your page, we're happy to share it with your people.
Yep.
And we're building a little library, and yourself and an amazing woman called AJ helped us with AAC devices. So those you two will be our starting off of our library. So awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah. And I'll be like, I'm dying to have you back again, and you haven't even left yet. So so hopefully we'll be hearing more from Kelsie. Thanks everybody for showing up. And Kelsie, thank you so much for sharing your expertise every single day on that Facebook page. It's amazing that you put so much into that to share with us, because you know how much we're all struggling. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. And I will see you guys all around on our little corner of the internet.
Yeah. See you later. Bye.